If you mistake attention for love, you will keep choosing the wrong people over and over again. Most people don't realize how easily the mind confuses emotional intensity with emotional safety. Attention feels like connection. Validation feels like affection. But psychologically, these are not the same thing, and misunderstanding this difference silently shapes your relationships, your attachment patterns, and even the way you see your own value. In today's video, we are going to break down the psychological mechanisms behind why so many people confuse being noticed with being loved, why this pattern becomes addictive over time, and how your emotional system starts to interpret inconsistency as attraction. You will also understand how this affects loneliness, dependency, and the cycle of toxic relationships that many people repeat without realizing. Because the real issue is not how much attention you receive. It's why your mind keeps craving it in the first place. And once you understand this, your perception of relationships will never function the same way again. This is a space of understanding the human mind and modern emotions, helping you recognize anxiety patterns, relationship dynamics, and internal thoughts that silently influence your behavior every single day. If you stay until the end, you will understand how emotional misinterpretation is formed, why your brain confuses attention with love, and how to break this cycle using psychological awareness instead of emotional impulse. Because what feels like love is often just familiarity with emotional uncertainty. You ever find yourself talking to someone all day, receiving messages, replies, notifications, and yet, by the end of it, you still feel strangely empty, like nothing actually connected? That feeling is more common than most people admit, and it usually doesn't come from what's happening outside, but from what your mind is doing with it internally. When you experience this, it's easy to assume something is wrong with your social life, or that you're just not around the right people. But psychologically, what often happens is different. Your brain starts confusing interaction with emotional fulfillment. In other words, you are getting attention, but your mind is not registering it as meaningful connection. This creates a subtle internal conflict. On the surface, everything looks normal: conversations, replies, presence. But underneath, your emotional system is still scanning for depth, safety, and consistency. And when it doesn't find it, it labels the experience as emptiness, even if you were technically social the whole time. Over time, this pattern can become so automatic that you stop noticing it. You just start believing that feeling disconnected is your default state, when in reality, it's your mind reacting to a lack of emotional alignment, not a lack of people around you. What most people don't realize is that your brain is constantly running silent, social simulations in the background, even when nothing is happening. After a simple conversation, a message, or even a small interaction, your mind doesn't just move on. It replays the moment, trying to detect what went right, what went wrong, and what could have been said differently. This is not random overthinking. It's an automatic survival-based mechanism designed to reduce uncertainty in social environments. Your brain treats social approval as a form of safety, so when something feels unclear, like a delayed reply, a dry response, or a change in tone, it starts filling the gaps with interpretations. The hidden problem is that this process doesn't stay neutral. It slowly reshapes how you behave in real interactions. You start adjusting your words, filtering your personality, and even changing your emotional expression without noticing it. Not because someone told you to, but because your mind learned patterns from past social outcomes. Over time, this creates a subtle disconnect. You are no longer reacting naturally, but performing based on predicted responses. And the more this loop repeats, the more your behavior becomes shaped by anticipation instead of authenticity, especially in relationships and daily communication. And this is where things start to shift in real life without you even noticing it. When your brain keeps adjusting your behavior based on predicted reactions, your natural presence begins to weaken. You might still be in the same conversations, the same social circles, even the same relationships, but something subtle changes in how you show up. Instead of reacting freely, you start monitoring yourself in real time. You pause before speaking, you soften opinions, you filter emotions, and sometimes you hold back entirely just to avoid wrong reactions. The problem is, people don't consciously notice this happening. They just slowly become less expressive, less direct, and less emotionally visible. And socially, this creates a strange effect. People don't respond to what you feel inside. They respond to what you project outward. So when your emotional expression becomes diluted, others start engaging with you in a more surface-level way, not because they don't care, but because your signals are less clear. This reinforces the cycle even more. Less clear expression leads to weaker responses lead to more self-monitoring, and more self-monitoring leads to even less authenticity. Over time, this can make social situations feel harder than they actually are, because your mind is no longer participating fully. It is constantly observing and adjusting instead of simply being present. Your brain doesn't react to the present only. It reacts to emotional memory stored from past experiences that were never fully processed. Every uncomfortable silence, every delayed reply, every shift in tone can trigger something much older than the current situation. It's not about the moment itself, it's about what your mind associates with that kind of moment. When you felt ignored before, rejected before, or emotionally uncertain in past relationships, your brain didn't just move on and erase it. It stored the emotional pattern. So now, even small signals in daily interactions can activate the same internal response. Overthinking, self-doubt, or the need to regain control by analyzing everything in detail. The deeper issue is that your mind doesn't separate time as clearly as you think. It connects similar emotional sensations across different situations and treats them as if they belong to the same story. That's why you can react strongly to something that seems small on the surface, but feels much bigger internally. This repetition creates a cycle where present experiences are constantly filtered through past emotional wounds. And without realizing it, you start reliving old feelings in new situations, not because history is repeating exactly, but because your emotional memory is still shaping how you interpret reality today. The moment you start noticing these patterns instead of reacting to them automatically, something very subtle but powerful begins to shift in your mind. You don't force yourself to stop feeling things or try to shut down emotions. You simply begin to see what your brain is actually doing in real time. And when that awareness appears, the interpretation of your experiences changes. A delayed reply doesn't immediately become rejection. A quiet conversation doesn't automatically become disconnection. A moment of uncertainty doesn't instantly turn into overthinking. There is now a small gap between what happens and what your mind assumes it means. This gap is where everything starts to transform, because your reactions are no longer fully automatic. You begin to recognize that many of the emotional responses you used to trust completely were actually built on old patterns, not present reality. Nothing external needs to change for this shift to begin. The same situations can still happen, the same people can still behave unpredictably, but internally, your mind stops treating every signal as a final conclusion. Instead, it starts observing before assigning meaning. And over time, this changes the entire structure of how you experience social life. Not by removing emotion, but by changing the speed at which emotion turns into interpretation. And maybe the most unsettling part of all of this is realizing how much of your life has been shaped by interpretations you never consciously chose. Not by events themselves, but by the meaning your mind assigned to them in silence. Because in the end, you don't experience reality directly. You experience your mind's version of it. And that version is constantly being built, adjusted, and rewritten based on patterns you don't always see happening. Some moments will still feel heavier than they should. Some interactions will still trigger something old inside you. But what changes over time is not the world outside. It's the way the world is internally translated within you. And once you become aware of that, even briefly, you start to notice how much of what felt absolute was actually interpretation layered over interpretation, quietly shaping the way you see people, connections, and even yourself. If you stayed until the end, take a second to reflect on what part of this felt most real for you. Leave a comment in English. I read them, and it helps show how many people are experiencing the same patterns in silence. If this video made sense to you, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps the channel reach more people who are trying to understand their own mind on a deeper level. You can also keep watching the next video on the screen or explore the playlist on the channel, where we go even further into how thoughts, emotions, and behavior quietly shape your daily life without you noticing.